The knock on my office door wasn't a knock. It was two officers and a locksmith standing behind them like they already knew they'd need him. The overhead fluorescents buzzed the way they always did on Tuesday mornings, and the smell of burnt coffee still hung in the break room down the hall. René Castillo? We have a warrant for your arrest. My father, Victor Castillo, was standing in the hallway behind them, wearing his gray funeral suit, arms folded, like he'd bought a front row seat to his own daughter's ruin. He wasn't shocked. He was satisfied. If you like stories like this, hit subscribe now. You don't want to miss how far my father was willing to go, or what he didn't know I still had left. My name is René Castillo. I'm 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, my own father had me arrested for a crime I never committed, because I refused to hand my company to my little brother. I built Castillo Freight Solutions in 2013 out of a used cargo van, and $3,200 I'd saved working double shifts as a dispatcher. My father called it a phase. He told my aunt at Thanksgiving that year that I'd come to my senses and get a real job, within 12 months. 11 years later, we ran 38 trucks across 4 states, cleared $5.8 million a year, and employed 96 people, including 2 of my cousins my father personally asked me to hire when they were between jobs. I never once said no to that family. My younger brother, Desmond, was 31 and had never held a job past 15 months. He wasn't dumb. He had real charm, a marketing degree from Grambling, and a smile that could talk a bank teller into anything. But he had a pattern. Start something big, get bored 6 months in, walk away from the wreckage, and land back on our parents' porch with a new plan and the same old excuses. By the time this started, he'd burned through a failed clothing line, a repossessed food truck, and I would find out later, almost $220,000 in debt to people who don't send friendly reminder texts. Growing up, the math in our house was never subtle. When I made honor roll in 10th grade, my father said, "Good, keep it up," and went back to his newspaper. When Desmond brought home a C+ that same semester, my mother baked a caramel cake to celebrate his improvement. When I turned 16, I was handed a bus pass and a part-time job application at the pharmacy on Delridge. When Desmond turned 16, my father co-signed a loan on a used Honda so he wouldn't fall behind his friends. I paid my own way through community college working nights at a call center. Desmond's tuition at a 4-year university, plus 2 semesters he failed and had to retake, plus a study abroad trip to Barcelona, came straight out of my parents' retirement account. A fact I only learned by accident years later when my mother mentioned it in passing like it was nothing. I told myself it was temporary, that things would even out once we were both adults with our own lives. I told myself that every single year for over a decade, and every year the gap only widened, because my father never saw it as a debt. He saw it as investment in the son who would eventually carry the family name forward, while I was simply expected to manage on my own, because I always had. My father never invested a cent in Castillo Freight beyond that first $3,200, which I paid back within 7 months, interest included, money he never asked for. But somewhere in the last 2 years, in his mind, that loan had quietly turned into ownership. He started showing up at the warehouse unannounced, walking the loading dock like an inspector, correcting drivers on procedures he didn't understand. He started calling my employees his people at church, telling deacons and old co-workers that his daughter ran the family business, a phrase that made my stomach turn every time it reached me secondhand. Then, 5 months before the arrest, at my mother's Sunday dinner table, over smothered chicken and rice she'd been making the same way since I was 6 years old, he set his fork down and said the sentence that split our family in half. "Renee, it's time you hand the company to your brother. He needs it more than you do." I laughed, actually laughed, thinking it was a joke passed around the table like the cornbread. It wasn't a joke. "He's your blood," my father said, like blood was a business plan on its own. "You have a husband, a house, 2 kids. You have enough. He has nothing." I told him plainly. "I built this with my own 2 hands, Dad. I didn't inherit it. I'm not giving it away." I offered Desmond something real instead, a route manager position at $78,000 a year, mentorship, and a real path to equity if he proved himself over 18 months. My father stood up so hard his chair scraped the tile. "You'll regret this," he told me. "You have no idea what you just started." He was right, and I wouldn't understand how right for another 5 months. 2 weeks after that dinner, my outside accountant, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya Nandi, called me with a strange question. Renee, did you authorize someone to request last year's tax filings and our merchant account statements? I hadn't. Someone calling himself your business partner phoned the office. Said his name was Victor Castillo. My father wasn't my partner. He wasn't a shareholder. He had no legal footing to request anything, and Priya hadn't given him a single page. But the fact that he'd tried told me everything. He was building a file on me. My father spent 30 years as a claims adjuster, not a criminal, but that's 30 years of learning exactly which forms unlock which doors, and exactly how much truth you need to bury inside a lie to make it hold. I called him directly. Did you try to pull my company's financial records? Silence, then. I have a right to know what's happening to something I helped start. You loaned me $3,200 in 2013. I paid it back. You have no legal right to my books. We'll see about that, he said and hung up. That night I sat my husband, Marcus, down at our kitchen table under the flickering bulb we kept meaning to replace. Something's coming, I told him. I don't know what, but he's not letting this go. Marcus took my hand, his grip steady the way it always was when I needed it most. Then we document everything from here on. I thought something meant a lawsuit, or a nasty scene at the next family reunion, maybe him working my aunts and cousins against me over the holidays the way he'd worked rooms his entire life. I never imagined he'd call the police and accuse his own daughter of a crime that existed only on paper he'd helped write himself. In an office 2 counties away, with a man who owed him an old favor. Here's what I only learned afterward, piece by piece, from my company's lawyer, and later from a detective who actually believed me. My father had reached out to an old friend of Desmond's, a man named Tyler Reyes, who worked in the accounts office of a competing freight company 2 counties over. My father had once helped Tyler's mother out of a rough housing situation years earlier, back at the claims office. And in families like ours, favors like that never really expire. My father asked Tyler to help him build a paper trail. Tyler, whether out of loyalty or plain naivety, created invoices that made it look like money was being funneled out of Castillo Freight into an account tied to my name through a signature that wasn't mine. It was sloppy. It was reckless. But it was enough to get a detective interested, especially once my father filed a sworn statement claiming he had reason to believe his own daughter was hiding company assets from investors. Investors who existed only on paper he had personally helped manufacture. He didn't need it to survive a real trial. He only needed it to hold up long enough to get me arrested, humiliated, and desperate enough to sign whatever Desmond's lawyer put in front of me just to make it stop. That was never about justice. It was leverage. My own father weaponized the police against me, because I told him no. And the worst part, my mother, Adele, knew. She'd overheard him on the phone with Tyler 3 weeks before it happened. She said nothing. Not to me. Not to anyone. Sit with this next moment, because it's the one that changed everything for me. My daughter, Nora, was 7. My son Eli was 5. It was bring your kid to work day at their school, and they were sitting in my office lobby waiting for the ice cream I'd promised them after. I could hear Nora's laugh through the door right as the cuffs went on. Ma'am, turn around, please. The metal was colder than I expected. Then I heard Eli's voice crack down the hallway. Mommy? That single word will live in my chest for the rest of my life. My mother stood 3 feet from my father the entire time, in her pale blue cardigan, gripping her purse with both hands like a shield. She didn't say one word. She looked at the floor. That silence was louder than anything written in that warrant. If you like stories like this, hit subscribe now. You don't want to miss how far my father was willing to go, or what he didn't know I still had left. I didn't know it yet, but what happened next was only the opening move in something my father had spent 5 months building. To understand how a 58-year-old deacon could stand in a parking lot and watch police walk his own daughter out in handcuffs, you have to understand what he actually thought he was owed. My father stood there as officers walked me past my own name etched into the warehouse sign. Past drivers who'd worked for me for a decade, frozen mid-shift, watching. He did not step toward his grandchildren to comfort them. He didn't even look at them. He looked at me, and there was something in his face I will never unsee, Not rage, not guilt. Satisfaction. My mother finally moved, but not toward me. She walked to my children, knelt down and said, "Grandma's got you, sweethearts. Let's go get that ice cream." She took my children's hands and walked them away from their handcuffed mother without a single word to me. Not "I'm sorry." Not "this is wrong." Not even a glance back. As the officer guided me into the patrol car, I watched her blue cardigan disappear around the corner with my babies, and I understood, with total clarity, that my father hadn't just declared war on me. My mother had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. I spent 7 hours in a holding cell at Kessler County Jail before my one phone call went through. I didn't call my husband first. I called Priya Nandi, because I knew if anyone could start pulling threads immediately, it was her. "Renee, thank God, where are you?" "Kessler County." "Priya, I need every financial record, every bank statement, every signature verification you can pull before tomorrow morning. I didn't do this." "I never thought you did," she said, and something in my chest finally cracked open with relief, because it was the first time all day someone had said those words without a beat of hesitation first. By the time Marcus arrived with a bail bondsman and my attorney, a sharp, unshakable woman named Bethany Cole, Priya had already found the first crack in my father's plan. The falsified transfer dates didn't match Castillo Freight's real payroll cycle. Whoever built the fake documents didn't know we processed payroll on the 10th and the 25th, not the 1st and the 15th like the forged invoices showed. "Someone who doesn't actually work inside your company made these," Bethany said, studying the pages under fluorescent jailhouse light. "Someone close enough to know your business exists, not close enough to know how it runs." I thought of Tyler Reyes immediately, and I thought of my father, standing in that parking lot, watching his daughter get handcuffed like he already knew the ending to a movie he'd written himself. I made bail at 1:52 a.m. My children were already asleep. I stood in their doorway for almost 20 minutes just listening to them breathe, and I made a decision right there in the dark. I wasn't signing anything, and I wasn't staying quiet either. Because here's what my father never understood about the company he thought he was entitled to. When I incorporated Castillo Freight in 2013, my very first investor, silent, on paper only, structured through a holding entity with my maiden name buried 3 layers deep in the filing, wasn't a bank. It was me, using a small inheritance from my grandmother that nobody in my immediate family ever knew existed, routed through a trust she'd set up specifically so my father could never touch it or claim leverage over it. That trust didn't just fund my first truck. It quietly owns the physical warehouse the company operates out of, and it holds the controlling interest in the holding company that owns Castillo Freight outright. My father spent 5 months trying to prove I was hiding assets from investors who didn't exist. He never once suspected that the real hidden owner behind his daughter's business was his daughter herself, protected by paperwork he never had the standing to request in the first place. He thought he was blackmailing a woman with nothing left to lose. He never imagined he was blackmailing the one person who legally controlled every asset he was trying to seize. If you like stories like this, hit subscribe now. Because what happens next is the part my father genuinely never saw coming. 3 days after I made bail, my father called. Not to apologize. To negotiate. "This whole mess can disappear," he said like he was handing me a gift. "Tyler can walk back his statement. The detective already has doubts. All you have to do is sign the transfer papers Desmond's lawyer drew up. 51% to him. You keep the rest. This all goes away, Renee." I sat in my car outside my children's school, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. "You had me arrested," I said, my voice shaking with a fury I had never once let myself aim at my father before. In front of my kids. My son asked me why I was wearing handcuffs. He's 5. He's going to remember that for the rest of his life. "You forced my hand," my father said. And there it was, no remorse, only justification. The right thing for this family was never handing a company I built from nothing to a man who's never built anything from scratch in his life. I told him. The right thing would have been you standing beside me instead of manufacturing a crime. Watch your tone with me. "No," I said, and something in me broke free permanently. I am done watching my tone with a man who used the police as a weapon against his own daughter. You crossed a line there's no walking back from. You will never get one share, one signature, $1 of what I built. And you are going to answer for what you did, publicly, legally, completely. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but for the first time in 5 months my spine felt straight. Marcus had been sitting beside me in the car the entire time, close enough to hear every word through the speaker. He didn't say anything right away. He just reached over, took the phone gently out of my hand, and set it face down in the cup holder. You didn't raise your voice once, he finally said. Not once, Renee, and he was the one yelling. I hadn't even noticed. I'd been so focused on staying steady that I hadn't realized how calm I actually sounded. How different that calm felt from the fear I'd been carrying for 5 straight months. I've never heard you talk to him like that, Marcus said. I've never had a reason to until now, I answered, and for the first time since the handcuffs I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was finally standing on solid ground. 2 days later my father called again, this time trying a different angle. Your mother is beside herself, he said. This is tearing the family apart. The family was torn apart the moment you decided a set of handcuffs was an acceptable negotiating tool, I told him. Tyler Reyes cracked within the week, agreeing to give a full statement in exchange for reduced charges. He testified that Victor Castillo had orchestrated the entire scheme, promising him a management title at Castillo Freight once Desmond took over, a title my father had absolutely no authority to promise anyone. The case against me didn't just collapse. It reversed direction entirely. My father was charged with filing a false police report, conspiracy to commit fraud, and forgery. At his arraignment, I watched my father stand in handcuffs for the first time in his life, in the same courthouse hallway where I'd been fingerprinted 7 weeks earlier. He didn't look at me. My mother sat 2 rows behind him alone, her cardigan traded for black, twisting a tissue in her hands. Afterward, in the parking lot, she finally approached me. Renee, I need you to understand. I was scared of him. I've been scared of him for 36 years. That doesn't explain why you walked my children away from me instead of standing beside me, I said. You had a choice in that moment, Mama. You chose him. Again. She had no answer. Just tears and an apology that came 5 months and 1 arrest too late. Desmond called me that same week. I never asked him to do this, he said. I didn't know until it already happened.
I'm sorry, Renee.
I really am. I believed him. It was a start. In the weeks that followed, the fallout moved fast and it moved publicly. Tyler Reyes was terminated from his job at the competing freight company within days of his statement to Detective Torres. And word around the industry traveled the way it always does in a business built on drivers who all know each other from the same 3 truck stops. My father's deacon board at Mount Olive Baptist quietly asked him to step back from his position, pending the resolution of a personal legal matter. A phrase everyone in that congregation understood perfectly well. The retirement community my parents had put a deposit down on for their eventual move to Baton Rouge rescinded the application once the background check came back. None of it was my doing. I didn't call anyone, didn't ask anyone to act. The consequences simply arrived, the way consequences eventually do when you build a plan on a foundation of lies. My father pled guilty 8 months later to a reduced charge and served 11 months, with the remainder of his sentence on probation. Castillo Freight Solutions closed that year with our highest revenue in company history, $6.9 million, because our clients and our drivers stood behind me the moment the truth came out. Priya Nandi became our chief financial officer. Bethany Cole still handles every piece of our legal work today. Desmond eventually took the route manager position I'd originally offered him. No shortcuts, no handouts, and earned 2 promotions on merit since. Last spring, he closed on his first house, his name alone on the deed. My mother and I are still rebuilding slowly. She goes to therapy now, something she never would have considered before. We talk most Sundays. It isn't what it used to be, and honestly I'm grateful for that because what it used to be was built entirely on her silence. As for my children, Nora and Eli don't remember the handcuffs the way I feared they would. What they remember, they tell me now, is that their mother came home that same night, just like she promised, and that she never once stopped fighting for what belonged to her. Some nights I still catch myself standing in their doorway the way I did the night I made bail, just listening to them breathe, just grateful to be the one tucking them in instead of a headline in someone else's story. I started a small scholarship fund that year for first-generation founders, mostly young women, who need a little capital to start something the world doesn't believe they can finish. I call it the Keep Your Word Fund. And every application reminds me a little of myself at 23, standing in front of a bank loan officer with a business plan nobody in my family thought was worth the paper it was printed on. My father built his legacy on control, on the belief that everything in this family ultimately belonged to him to redistribute as he saw fit. I built mine on keeping my word, to my children, to my employees, and finally, to myself. That's the difference between us. It always was, even back when I was too young and too eager to please to see it clearly. If there's one thing I'd want anyone listening to this to take with them, it's this. Love does not require you to hand over what you built with your own two hands. Family does not mean unlimited access to your life's work. The people who truly love you will celebrate what you've built. The ones who only want to control you will always find a reason why it should belong to someone else. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and tell me down in the comments, what would you have done in my place? I'll see you in the next story.